You ready to dive into something pretty dark today?
Yeah, lay it on me.
The case of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, the Toolbox Killers.
Oh man, that one is rough.
Their crimes in the late 70s, just absolutely horrific, and I know our listeners are here for that deep dive, but we're going to handle it carefully.
Absolutely.
What we're aiming for is to kind of understand how these two guys became the monsters that they were.
Right. And I think that's the core question here. Not just, recounting the awful things they did, but why? I mean, this case, it's practically become the poster child for the whole serial killer van trope,
Yeah.
that image, it's stuck with people for decades.
It's true, yeah. It's like almost a real-life horror movie, which makes it even more disturbing, I think. But before we get into the van and all the really chilling details of the crimes, let's start with who these men were before they became, synonymous with the Toolbox Killers. Bittaker, for example, had a rap sheet going all the way back to when he was just 12 years old.
Well,
12. Theft, assault, even a hit and run. Wow. So trouble from the very beginning.
yeah. And he was in and out of foster homes. His parents had abandoned him, which sadly isn't uncommon, right? In the histories of violent offenders, you often see this lack of stability, of support in those really key developmental years.
Right, those early years are so crucial. Makes you wonder, what if things have been different for him?
It really does. And later on, when Bittaker was imprisoned for other offenses, he underwent some psychological evaluations that painted a pretty disturbing picture.
I bet.
Yeah, they diagnosed him as, get this, borderline psychotic and highly manipulative, but he also had an IQ of 138.
So intelligence without any kind of moral compass. A dangerous combination.
Exactly, like a recipe for disaster.
It really is. And to add to that, he seemed to, revel in the infamy, the notoriety of his crimes. He actually bragged to psychiatrists about how his actions made him feel powerful.
Really?
Yeah, important, Classic narcissistic personality disorder traits fueling his criminal behavior.
Now, Norris, on the other hand, his childhood was marked by, severe trauma.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that.
He experienced sexual abuse in the foster care system.
Awful.
And if that wasn't bad enough, his own parents basically rejected him, saying that they only stayed together for him and his sister.
God, that's just devastating.
Yeah.
I mean, the psychological damage from that kind of parental rejection, it's hard to overstate.
You would think that that in itself would lead to some serious problems.
Well, it's no surprise that he was later diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. People with that disorder, they often struggle with forming relationships. They experience a kind of detachment from reality, which can make them vulnerable to, manipulation.
So here we have these two deeply troubled individuals, both with major psychological issues, and where do they end up?
Let me guess. The same place.
The same place, the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo.
Figures.
And what happens next? It feels almost inevitable, but it's chilling nonetheless.
Yeah, I think I know where this is going.
They form a bond. Bittaker kind of acts as this protector figure for Norris. But this isn't just a typical prison friendship.
Sure.
They start sharing their darkest fantasies, this shared desire to inflict pain, to exert control over others. And that's where the planning starts. They decide when they get out, they're going to target young girls.
One for every age, wasn't it? Between 13 and 19.
You got it.
God. Think about that level of premeditation. This wasn't some, spur-of-the-moment thing. They meticulously planned this out. Each victim was just a number to them, like a checkbox on a list.
Chilling. It makes you wonder if they hadn't met in prison, would their paths have still led them to such horrific acts? Or was it this, like a perfect storm? Two broken minds finding a terrible synergy in their shared darkness.
It's a question that's debated even now, right? Among criminologists, psychologists. Was their partnership the catalyst, or were they both just ticking time bombs, just waiting to explode?
It's a question we might never have a definitive answer to, but it's definitely worth considering. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and get into the really disturbing details of their crimes.
Sounds good. It really does make you think, doesn't it? What makes people capable of such things?
No easy answers there. But once these two got out, they didn't waste any time, putting their plan into action.
Right.
Bittaker, he was actually released first and seemed to be doing okay, at least on the surface. Had a decent job, machinist, was keeping a low profile, but it was all an act. He stayed in contact with Norris, and they spent months, meticulously getting ready
For what was to come.
Yeah. They bought a van, a 1977 GMC cargo van, no side windows, big sliding door.
Textbook.
It became their mobile torture chamber. And really, it became a symbol of their crimes, I think.
It really is. That whole serial killer van image.
Yeah.
Like right out of a nightmare.
And they totally embraced that. They even nicknamed it Murder Mac.
Murder Mac. Jeez.
For 3 months, they drove up and down the Pacific Coast Highway, just practicing, their abduction methods. They'd offer girls rides, marijuana, whatever they thought would work.
So, chilling to think about. Honing their skills like that?
Yeah.
Treating these young women like practice runs?
Yeah. And there's no sign that they hesitated at all during this phase. Like, were they ever unsure? Did they have second thoughts? Doesn't seem so.
It seems like, if anything, it just made them more confident.
Yeah.
Bolder. They even modified the van.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
They added a bed, a cooler for drinks, and this is the really disturbing part. They put together this toolkit.
A toolkit?
Yeah, filled with, well, instruments of torture.
God. Like they were creating their own world inside that van. A world where they had all the power. And their victims, no way out.
And they didn't stop there. They found this secluded fire road up in the San Gabriel Mountains. Almost like a lair hidden from prying eyes.
They were serious about this.
Oh, absolutely. They broke the lock on the gate to this road, replaced it with their own. They wanted complete control of everything.
Their own hunting ground. So a stage is set, the trap is laid, and then it begins. Their reign of terror. Their first victim, 16-year-old Cindy Schaefer, walking home from church in Redondo Beach.
Just a normal day.
Yeah, unimaginable. Bittaker and Norris spotted her, tried their usual tricks, offering a ride, marijuana.
And she refused.
She did, strong-willed. But it wasn't enough. They drove ahead, parked. Norris pretended to be getting something from the back of the van when Cindy walked by.
They grabbed her.
Yeah, threw her inside, music blaring to drown out her screams, bound and gagged before she could even cry for help.
I mean, how do you even process something like that happening to you?
I can't imagine. But what's really strange about Cindy's case? She was, by all accounts, remarkably composed.
Composed?
Yeah. Bittaker even said later she was in this magnificent state of self-control, no resisting, no pleading. It was almost like she'd accepted her fate.
That's so eerie, almost like she knew there was no point in fighting.
It's heartbreaking. She even asked if she could pray before they killed her, and they said no. Even that was too much for them to allow. The actual killing, it was drawn out, agonizing. Norris started to strangle her, but he stopped.
He stopped. Why?
He claimed he was disturbed by the look in her eyes.
That's weird, right? This guy can do all these horrific things, but the look in her eyes got to him.
Right. It's like this twisted sense of morality or something.
Disturbing.
Bittaker had no such problem. He finished what Norris started, first trying to strangle her, then using a coat hanger and pliers to slowly crush the life out of her. Then they wrapped her body in plastic, threw her off a cliff, hoping animals would destroy the evidence.
Cold, calculated.
Trying to cover their tracks. But the brutality of the crime, it was just the beginning.
It's like their cruelty just kept escalating, Each victim worse than the last.
It really does seem that way. Just 2 weeks after Cindy, they abducted 18-year-old Andrea Hall. She was hitchhiking.
Another easy target.
Yeah. And unlike Cindy, Andrea fought back. Hard. But in the end, they overpowered her.
Of course. 2 against 1 and, determined to get what they wanted. It makes you think about the psychological aspect of their crimes, too. Like, with Andrea, it wasn't enough just to abduct her.
Right.
They made her walk naked up this hill. They took degrading photos of her. The whole point was to humiliate, dehumanize her.
Assert their dominance.
Exactly. It wasn't just about taking a life. It was about crushing their spirits first.
And just a couple months after that, they found Jackie Gilliam and Leah Lamp, 15 and 13 years old. They were at a bus stop.
Hitchhiking.
Right. Sadly, yes.
Such easy prey for guys like Bittaker and Norris.
Right. It's tragic. And Leah, she was so brave, she actually tried to get away.
From the van.
Yeah. When they weren't taking her to the beach like they promised, she jumped out.
Wow.
But Norris caught her, hit her, dragged her back in. Someone actually saw the struggle.
Really?
Yeah, but Bittaker managed to convince him it was nothing, said Leah was just having a bad trip.
Wow. Just like that. They were able to manipulate the situation.
Yeah, and this time it was Jackie who became the focus of their sadism. Bittaker even recorded himself.
Recorded it.
Assaulting her. He wanted to capture her terror, to relive it, I guess.
I've heard about those tapes. They're supposed to be just horrifying.
They are. A direct window into their depravity. Norris told Jackie to pretend he was her cousin while he was assaulting her, by the way.
Oh,
It just gets worse. Leah tried to escape again, but they caught her, beat her, and eventually they killed both girls.
it's a cycle of escalating violence. With each attack, it seemed to get worse.
You're right. And it all culminates in the murder of their final victim, Lynette Ledford. Bittaker actually knew Lynette from her job.
From her job.
Yeah. She worked at McDonald's. She was only 16 when he offered her a ride that led to her death.
Jeez. When you think about how these guys operated, it's calculated, it's predatory, it's pure evil.
It really is. And this time, they documented the torture, the whole thing, on tape. I won't go into the details, they're too gruesome. But suffice it to say, it reveals just how depraved they truly were. They beat her, assaulted her, used tools to mutilate her, and through it all, they seemed to enjoy her pain.
It's unimaginable.
Norris actually encouraged Lynette to scream louder while he was hitting her with a sledgehammer.
And after all that, they strangled her with a coat hanger. But there's one more chilling detail about Lynette's case. Bittaker dumped her body in a residential neighborhood.
Why? Why there?
It's like he wanted people to know, to spread fear, to exert his control over the whole community.
That level of arrogance. Unbelievable. And that, ultimately, is what led to their downfall.
Right. You're right. It's almost hard to believe, after all the planning, the careful execution of their crimes, it was arrogance that did them in.
Yeah, and bragging.
Norris was feeling, I guess, invincible, so he started bragging to a friend, a guy named Joe Jackson.
Another inmate.
Yeah, someone he knew from prison. So all that planning, and it comes down to just loose lips.
Pretty much. Jackson, to his credit, he went to the police.
That couldn't have been an easy decision, right?
Yeah.
Given his own past, he was risking a lot.
Absolutely. But he did the right thing. And it gave the police their break. They already had Norris on file for an earlier assault, and the victim in that case, she was able to ID both him and Bittaker.
So they had their guys.
Yeah, they put Norris under surveillance, eventually arrested him for drugs. But while they were searching his place, guess what?
Bittaker called.
Ding, ding, ding. An officer answered, pretended to be a friend, but Bittaker is too smart to fall for it. He panicked, tried to get rid of evidence, went back to his motel room, and guess who was waiting for him?
The police.
The police. Game over.
And even then, they had all the evidence, the photos, the jewelry from the victims, the tools, those awful tapes. I remember reading they even played the tape of Lynette's torture for her mother in court.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for anyone in that courtroom. To hear that, it wasn't just evidence. It was a testament to the suffering those girls endured.
And of course, they were done.
Norris cracked, agreed to a plea deal, testified against Bittaker in exchange for a lighter sentence. He got 45 years to life.
But no death penalty.
Right. Bittaker, though, no remorse, defiant to the end. He was convicted on all charges, sentenced to death, but he died in prison back in 2019. Changes to California law meant he was never executed.
Norris is still alive, isn't he?
He is eligible for parole, but has refused to attend any of the hearings.
Maybe even he knows how monstrous his crimes were.
It's a case that sticks with you. The level of premeditation, the cruelty, the way they documented their crimes, it forces you to think about the darkest parts of human nature.
It does. And it makes you wonder, were these men born evil, or did their experiences, their traumas, their mental illness shape them into what they became? Could something have been done? Could it have been prevented?
Tough questions, but important ones, I think.
Absolutely. We have to understand how these things happen, why people become capable of such horrific acts.
I want to thank you for joining us on this very difficult deep dive. It's not easy to confront this kind of darkness.
But it's important. We have to remember the victims, learn from what happened, and never stop asking those difficult questions.
Well said. And that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll be back with another case, another journey into the dark side of history soon.